Hello and welcome to the talk today from Steyning Society. Just going to share the screen with you and I'm just going to do that and then I'll start again. Hello and welcome to the Steyning Society's recorded talk for this month and next month as well. As it says on the screen, this is the talk which is replacing the talk that was due, which is because the speaker is unfortunately ill for this month. So instead, I'd like to introduce myself. For those of you who haven't met me before, for one of the talks that I do and the previous talk that I gave to Steyning Society, my name is Kevin Newman and I am the author of Beef Every Day But No Latin. And that is the name of my latest book, which is a historical novel. And as you can see, it is all about an 11-year-old boy who set up his own school. Not only that, though, it's here in Sussex that this happened back in 1925 in Hove. And you can see the place where it started in front of you on the screen. And we're going to look today at a couple of things, the background to the story. We're going to look as well at how the story came into my sphere of interest, how the story developed, a bit of the research behind it, and there's going to be some anecdotes and some aspects of the story as well. So hopefully it should be a good talk. It'll be an hour long. I'm going to try and beat Janet and get under a 1 hour 7 minutes if I can, which should be easy because she knows bigger words than I do. So let's see if I can beat Janet. And hello, Janet, if you are listening. I'm delighted as well that by the end of the story, it's sort of very much a story for our times. And if you do read the book, I hope you very much enjoy it. It's a good book, no matter what age you are, I hope. And I hope the talk today will entice you to read it. If you have already read it, then hopefully it'll add to the story and give you extra layers of knowledge. And if I don't achieve any of that, at least by the end of the talk today, I hope to be able to put you off beef for life and explain why the book is called what it's called. And it's all based around this premise here, this thought, which is not actually a quote from the protagonist. It's one I made up, but it does sum up what he feels after a bit of a revelation, eureka moment that happens to him at the age of 11. And as it says on the screen, really here, he wonders why, the people whose minds are being molded, young people, why that's left to those with the moldiest minds, the older generation. Why is it not the case of young people have more of a say in their own school and schooling? And that's the premise of the book, really. And it's a bit of a unique story. Just a couple of words about having a talk. This was going to be on YouTube, but it's just a recording. But of course, this sort of talk is not one that's interactive. If it was a Zoom one, you could stop, ask questions, you could type them in. With this, you can't. But the bonus is, of course, you are in control. You are watching a recording of myself, so you can feel free to mute me at any point, as people have started to do to Donald Trump. You can stop, you can restart, you can go and get a drink, a cup of tea, bacon sarnie, whatever you want. Hopefully, if you do pause the talk, of course, I hope you do come back to us and finish it off. And if all goes well, this should be going out to you on the evening of Monday, November the 16th, which is the first opportunity for you to see this talk. If you are watching it on that night, I've agreed to be around on the email. So if you do wish to ask a question during the talk or afterwards, I'll be around till about 9ish. And the address that's popped up on your screen, info@allinclusivehistory.org, is the one that you can email me questions about. If you do have questions after that time, I will still answer them. Please email me with any queries or comments or anything you want to know about. But of course, I won't necessarily be responding to emails quite as quickly. So just be aware, please, that that Monday the 16th is the best time. But I believe this talk is going to be live for 2 months, so you have plenty of opportunities to do so. Anyway, to introduce myself, for those of you who weren't at the last talk, my name's Kevin Newman. I'm from a company called All Inclusive History, based here in Sussex, that does teaching, tours, training, trips, and anything to do with history and heritage. But also, my colleagues and I, also do a lot of writing. We, as you can see here, supplements for the Argus. You can see as well that I'm a historian for the Metropole Hotel in Brighton. And I started off writing by being asked to contribute to this book here on the top left-hand side of the screen called Why Remember the First World War. And it all happened when my class that I was teaching history to decided they wanted a project. So we invited a publishers in, which was Oxford University Press, and the kids were used as guinea pigs. They had to say what they thought about exercises and the text and could they improve it. And we got so into it, they asked me to write a bit of the book and then some other books that are now in schools all around the country. But I love writing best, most of all about my own county. I really do, which is why I've been pleased to write over a dozen books now on Sussex, East and West, and about my home city of Brighton and Hove. But one of these books led to me writing beef every day, but no Latin, which I'll refer to as beef to save a bit of time. And it was in my early days. I was on about my fourth book, which was 50 Gems of Sussex, which you can see in front of you here. And I was speaking to lots of different places and buildings and events, and saying to them, you know, what would you think I should include? Unfortunately, I got to the deadline, and a wonderful, friendly guest house approached me and said, "Could you write about our hotel? Would you include us in 50 Gems?" And I said, "No, I'm sorry, we've just passed the deadline, and I was a bit over the deadline, so I can't really add any more." And they said to me, "We're a bit unusual. We think we're a bit of a gem because we used to have a school here in our premises." And as you can see on the screen, I'd just written a book about a school, about St Mary's in Washington. So I wasn't terribly keen to write about another school, I must be honest. But the lovely people at the Claremont Guest House persevered, and they said, no, come and have a look at our archive. We can assure you we are a gem of Sussex, and this is us. So they invited me down to Second Avenue in Hove, and Dan and Vicky and Coralie, the lovely family that run the Claremont Guest House, asked me to look through their archive, and they said we've got some letters from some gentlemen who used to be boys when the guest house was a school. And so I looked at it. I wasn't particularly inspired at the start. I remember thinking, I really don't want to do this. I don't think it's going to be terribly interesting. But the more I read these letters from a chap called Maurice Brigden, the more I was hooked. And there was other letters from a lady called Marjorie Clifton. And Marjorie was married to James Bernard Clifton, who was the boy who set up the school. And there were even some letters in there from James himself, although he tended to be preferred to be known as Bernard. And as boys did in those days in the 20s, they all referred to each other by their surnames. So he's often known as Clifton, of course. But these letters really grabbed me, and I thought this can't be the case. There can't be a school set up by children. That wouldn't have been allowed. And of course, the nearest that we have to children setting up their own school is the very famous school in Suffolk called Summerhill, which was set up by this rather grumpy-looking gentleman here called A.S. Neal. And if you've not come across Summerhill before, it was a school that espoused children running the school in terms of choosing what lessons, having a democracy, having a council, deciding on teachers, which a lot of this has become part of the course these days. There is student voice in schools, there's student councils, children are involved in interviews. I've been interviewed by a panel of children many a time over the years as a teacher. But there was nothing in the records anywhere about a book, about a school where a child had made the first steps to set up that school. But the more I looked into it, the more I spoke to different people. And after a visit to Claremont School, which is still going today in Baldslow, north of Hastings on the A21, and they let me loose on their archive, I realised that this was the case, and the information all corroborated. And this was the picture that persuaded me to do it. James Clifton is this lad here. You can't see him very clearly in the photo, unfortunately, but I wanted to find out more about this boy who'd achieved this act that so many people had not done before. And he did indeed recruit initially a small group of 10, 12 boys back in 1925 to attend his school. And he seems a bit of a character. He doesn't seem too obnoxious, which when I first spoke to people about him, they thought he would have been. He seems quite modest from his letters. He never refers to himself. He refers to himself as the writer of the letters, and he does downplay a lot of what he did. It was up to the others to sort of say, yes, it was him. You know, he deserves recognition. And so Clifton manages to get, along with his best friend, who isn't in this picture, a lad called um, Douglas Payne. He manages to recruit this group of young men, most of whom were 10, 11. Some of them down the bottom row here were about 7. And they do indeed start up a school with the help of some adults. They choose their own school uniform, which you can see here from Cobley's, the outfitters in Hove. They decide on the caps, the PE kit. They decide as well on the teachers. And this is a key one. This gentleman here you can see is called Alec Ross, I believe his name is. You can see him as Mr. Ross here at the top of the screen. He has a wonderful predilection for never looking the right way in a photo. He's always staring off in one direction. He obviously got very bored or was a bit of a rebel, but he was a well-known golfer at the time with a large amount of money to invest. He was a wealthy golfer, and although it looks like he's playing cricket here, these look like cricket nets. He indeed managed to invest in the school and become one of the first teachers of geography and a few subjects. James himself was one of the first teachers as well, which makes it all the more remarkable. But of course, one teacher wouldn't be enough, and this is James here. You can see him here. He needed a headmaster. He needed a matron to look after the pastoral side of the school, and this is the gentleman he recruited as his headmaster. This is Michael O'Byrne, who is known commonly as Mick to the family, or Mob, M-O-B, Mick O'Byrne to the boys. And this is his son here. This is William O'Byrne, or Bill, as he was known by the boys until he became one of the teachers as well. And after that, he was known as Wob, or Sir, and he would go on to be the second headmaster. His son Jeremy, who I've had the honour to meet, became the third headmaster and the third O'Byrne, but not for very long, sadly. This lady here, all in white, is Eileen O'Byrne. She wasn't Eob. I'm sure she would have been pleased to know, but she was the matron, and she's partly responsible for the title of the book. Anyway, just to read a bit from the book to you about Mob. Here we go. See, I'm very fond of him. He's a character with he wouldn't last very long in schools these days, but he is a product of his time, a shell-shocked and admittedly alcoholic veteran of the First War. This is from the start of the book. At this point, I should point out that Mob wasn't your usual schoolmaster. Despite his well-to-do background from a middling Irish family in Lecklinbridge, County Carlow in Ireland, no delicacies of thought or expression were needed in his view. Nor, according to him, should young gentlemen be excused the odd fist or the language of the dockyard, public bar, or the factory. Rationing of the coarse, the guttural, the offensive, and the malodorous phrase or word was seldom required by Mob, except when the headmaster, Mr. Chubb, slid into view. Yes, that really was his name. Mob would insult, tease, insinuate, and pester the living daylights out of you, and tell you how much he detested you and every other frisky 11-year-old in that class. We weren't all actually 11, but that hadn't seemed to have sunk in with Mob. To him, everyone was 11 years old and vermin, effluent, toe rags, and usually by Friday, unwholesome scum. And we loved him for it. But even with his slight reek of Guinness farts and tobacco, the odd punch, his inability to remember your name by the afternoon, and to refer to each one of us boys as "you there" for his ill-fitting gowns, also his failure to shave around his pronounced Adam's apple. There was something he had the other masters didn't, especially the insipid and aptly named headmaster, Mr. Clovis Chubb, who needed the help of his mother to run Holland House School. Mob was a war hero who, in a previous life as Lieutenant M. O'Byrne of the London Regiment, had taken a German bullet in his knee at 3rd Ypres in 1917, as he frequently told us. Despite mood swings as a result of the pain he still suffered, he had a genuine warmth and sparkiness about him. He seemed in his own way to care for us, who we were, where we were going, and who we were going to be one day. He might clip us round the heads. What teacher at that time didn't? This was a generation who'd seen a millennium's worth of violence in a handful of years, but he would also rip out the leaves from books on which he would draw intricate pictures to give us as prizes. And that's just a little bit, but it gives you an idea of the first headmaster of Claremont School, as it would become known. And as you probably guessed from the book, Holland House was where James was, and it was where Bill and his wife were as well. And so James poaches the teacher from out under the auspices of Mr. Clovis Chubb, who is the very much the villain of the piece, and we'll come on to him in a bit. Here's Ross again looking the wrong way, and Bill is not very old in this picture. He's around about 18, which is the age he becomes not long after the second headmaster of the school. So there is a real tradition of youth setting up Claremont School, but it's not the only school. Other schools in Hove were set up by 20-year-olds, a 30-year-old, and Holland House at one point had a young headmaster as well. But this is the group that James recruits. As you can see, it's slightly bigger here, and now they're in the garden at Claremont House. And we better look into the success of the school. James manages to do what no one else has done. This is William, Bill, Wob, later on with other masters from other schools, and he was a great cricketer. He was brought down very early in life by a poor constitution. He was often ill for most of his life, and he dies very early. But he was a great cricketer and footballer as well, and he played against the Corinthian Casuals. If you've never come across that football team, they're still going today in the amateur leagues. And at this point, they believed so much in fair play that if they had a penalty awarded against them, they would walk out of the goal, or the goalie would, to let the other side take the goal as punishment. Wouldn't get that in the Premier League these days, would you? What you do get, though, these days, of course, is schools in 2020 that are very unusual. And I think this is why it's a book for this time. I hope children that read the book, and it has been read in schools at the moment, I hope that it's an escape for them to go 100 years back in the past from our terrible 20s to a very different 20s, the 1920s. And who would have thought that schools would be something out of Doctor Who at the moment, with this weird experience the children are going through. And so I think with Claremont School being a small, friendly, family-run school, it's almost an escape that children need, and adults too, at the moment. And that's why I'm delighted to have found the story. I'm not the first one to uncover it, but I'm the first one to write a novel about it. And it appealed to me for so many reasons. I think, like, this is me, age 7, on my bike, getting out and about in Hove and Brighton. This is Brighton's Preston Park. I think I can see, that we need this story very much at this time. Schools have got, as I've said in a lot of interviews, schools have got so big, and a lot I've been aware of, some I've worked in, have been just focused on exams and not so much the children as they should be. And this takes us back to a time where schools were small families, and we've lost a lot along the way in education. I do think, but also I can see how we all would like to be James Bernard Clifton. I always had dreams of setting up my own school. I didn't do that. I did end up setting up my own school magazine and computer magazine. But we all see bits of James, hopefully, in ourselves. And like him, I have the same birthday. We're both from Brighton and Hove. We both left and came back. And he's an intriguing character. And he goes on to have an amazing life, as you'll see in a minute. But most of all, I had to tell this story because nobody had in detail. A lady I've been corresponding with who's been wonderful, Barbara White, is the author of Prefects and Pylons, which is the story of Claremont School, and her first chapter is about James. And she carries on the story fantastically through the rest of the school's history. I've focused on this early stage, but it's a privilege to be able to write it. And no matter what age you are, if you're 80 or 8, we're either at school or have been to school. And I think we do appreciate that. If we could have done, we'd love to have snapped our fingers like Thanos from the Avengers movies, if you've seen them, and made some of our teachers disappear. And we'd all love to have had like a fancy football league. We'd like to have created our own school of our own friends and our own teachers. And that's exactly what James does. But he doesn't do it on his own. He does it with the help of his best buddy. Like all protagonists, he needs a sidekick, a partner. And James has Douglas Payne, who I mentioned earlier. Dougie is his sort of foil, his prop, his sidekick, his wingman. But he's also the member of a very caring, loving family, which James doesn't have. James is sadly, as he says in his own words, from a broken home. Dad was made to leave by his mother for not bringing enough money into the house. So at the start of the book, you can see there's a real gaping hole in James's life, a bit like Harry Potter needs Hogwarts. I think James needs the Claremont. He needs this family that he doesn't have. I got the impression that Mum didn't have a lot of time for him, and that comes across in the book where I've developed her character. But he does get the love and warmth he needs from the school, from the O'Byrnes, from the Paynes as well, Dougie's family. And I've really, I enjoyed making that family the sort of the warmth that he needs. And I think without school and the Paynes, would he have gone on to be this fine adult that he becomes? Who knows? But probably less likely. The Claremont as well. The place has grabbed me. It's a very rare building in that it's the only building in Second Avenue in Hove that is still an intact Victorian villa, pretty much the same as it was in the time of the school back in 1925. And there's not many Victorian villas that are completely intact in Brighton and Hove, and you can still see the action taking place in the rooms. When you look around the school, you can imagine the setting, and that's why I love it. And I'll give you a bit of a tour later on virtually in this talk. But most of all, at the moment, we've been as Britain a very fractured team. America certainly are at the moment, and this is about creating a team, bringing people together, and that's, I think, very much a message for our time. And you've got these characters that really came to life for me. James, Mob, Eileen to a bit as well, and Clovis Chubb. I've made a real pantomime villain. He's a bit of a Captain Darling from Blackadder. But these people have been in my head for such a long time. I'm very pleased to get them out. I'm also pleased as well to have written the story, because I've done a lot of work on hotels and schools as a historian, and this allowed me to bring both together and write a story about them both, and write a story that is funny. I feel that's not me sort of bigging up my ability to write comedy, not at all. There's so much comedy that came with the story, and I didn't need to do anything particularly with. I love the relationship between James and Dougie, which I develop. Clovis Chubb, who I really make him out to be an utter rotter, and I make his school that James leaves, Holland House, to be the nemesis school of the Claremont, which I think the story needed. But the bits that came already oven ready, to use a Bojo phrase, the school had a one-legged swimming teacher who went on to be a Hollywood movie star. And I'm not making that up. It had a dog that would steal the school ball. There was an air raid that Bill blamed on two German pupils. There's there's so much there that made me laugh. And then at the centre of it all is our protagonist, who does this amazing thing as a young man, and then goes on to have a very underrated but very outstanding life as a member of the Royal Navy, as an engineer, and he not only, as you can see here, creates inventions. He not only engineers for the Royal Navy in World War II, but also in the Cold War. And as you can see, his devices were part of the space race when Britain was part of the space race and when we also helped America. But he wanted to be known, simply, his wife said, as a bloody good engineer. And he certainly was. But he was also a lot more than that. And when we meet him, he's living here. This is 22 Lansdowne Place in Hove. So as you can see, he has got a fair bit of money, even though I think times were tougher with Dad out the way and Mother Estelle is the name I've given her, because there's no records as to what her name was that I've been able to find. Estelle is a bit of a profligate spender, but James seems to have a lot of time on his hands. I think he's a wee bit neglected, was the impression I got. And so this is his life, but he wants more. He walks every day up the hill to his school, but he's going to be walking downhill eventually to the Claremont. And the school he goes to, Holland House, that I've mentioned, is at the top of the hill in Hove, where you have a bit of a plateau. This is Cromwell Road today, and at the far end, if the arrow's pointing you to the far end, this is number 36 and 35, and these are the two buildings where Holland House was located. Holland House had been going for a while. It was a very established school. I'll just read you a little bit about it from the book, if I may. As you can imagine, it's obviously got things that Clifton's not happy about, as it leads to him looking out of the window one day, and the action takes place that leads to him then trying to improve on his own school. The book also tells you a lot about Hove and Second Avenue. It's just started to rain here, so apologies if there's a bit of noise. I'm in a conservatory, so it may be that you're hearing other noise. I'll try and read as loudly as I can. We're just having a huge downpour. Holland House School was founded before the First World War in numbers 35 and 36 Cromwell Road by a Mr. W.B. Carwood. It was a boys' prep school established with the aims of training boys up for the Navy or preparing them for entry to senior public schools. Unfortunately for W.B. Carwood and the school, he was a member of the Territorials, and so was called up to serve King and country in India in the Great War, which is where he was killed. One of the school's early pupils was the author Patrick Hamilton, who wrote the famous West Pier trilogy of books, the first of which features boys at a Hove boarding school, of which Hove had many at the time. Hamilton attended with his brother Bruce from 1912 to 1914, but was moved to Coley Court School in Chiswick, which he despised, and so he returned to Holland House as a boarder. Hamilton was far more positive about the school than I was. This is James speaking here, but died young as a result of alcoholism. There seems to be a fair bit of alcoholism in the book. It seems to crop up a bit. I think James very wisely avoids Hamilton's route, and he avoids going down the path of mob, and he ends up as a teetotaler, which is probably why he lives such a grand old age, only dying in the year 2000. Thanks to Hamilton, though, the school was immortalised as Rodney House in Hamilton's The West Pier. Holland House's next head was C.R. de Lyons Pike, whose name everyone managed to incorrectly pronounce. He was high church, bespectacled, and unusually young for a headmaster. He certainly wasn't 11 years old, though, like me, nor was he determined to keep the school in Hove. In 1922, the year Hamilton published the West Pier, its headmaster decided, for some reason, to move the school to Burgess Hill, 9 miles away north of the Downs, northeast of Hove. It became St Peter's Court School, and Holland House continued, still in Hove, under its original name, under the leadership of two joint headmasters, C.T.J., that's Clovis, Chubb, and H.E.D. Townsend. Headmasters in those days all had to have 3 initials by law. After my time, the school survived in a fashion under Chubb and moved to a house called Wick Lodge in Lansdowne Road. We'll stop there for the moment, but Holland House does eventually pack up. It moves to Wick Lodge, which is also St Michael's Hall, which we'll talk about later, which bizarrely then the Claremont moves to as well. But the Claremont lasts a lot longer than Holland House, which manages to fold before the Second World War, whereas Claremont House, of course, is still going today with over 700 pupils of all ages. But it's in this school that the action takes place that makes Clifton decide to set up his own school. I think from the records, Chubb is a bit of a tartar with a cane. He's well known for dishing out canings. He seems to possibly take a bit of an enjoyment in it. So that may be another reason why the boys detest their headmaster and want to escape him. But it's the action is that a book is thrown at Clifton's head in a maths lesson one day when he's staring out of the window and he's guilty of inattention, as his teacher says. And this is when he comes up with this whole idea of why should I not set up a school? Why should I, he puts his mind, as he says in the letter, to the mathematics of starting up his own school rather than algebra. And this is the thought that goes through him. Why shouldn't children, be able to set up their own school? Bizarrely, though, the teacher that throws the book is one who's already at Holland House. Obviously, Ross joins them later. The teacher that throws the book is Mob. And so the start of the book is Mob throwing the book and James's revelation. But it's just very, very peculiar that this teacher that throws a book at his head, James decides to reward by taking him on a journey with him and adopts him as his first headmaster of his new school. Excuse me a second. So, obviously, James doesn't bear any grudges, and he recruits the O'Byrnes from Holland House. He recruits Roths, and him and Dougie go and recruit a group of pupils from his year, the year below, and these 7-year-olds. And Maurice Brigden, who I mentioned earlier, his letters are the ones we use for a lot of the source material. He says how Dougie and James would knock on houses and be a bit like a press gang. They persuade parents to let their children be taken on by the Claremont. And I love Brigden's letters. Maurice's letters are fantastic. He's very much he roots for James to be credited as starting up the school, which he doesn't always get the credit for. But what I was very sad about was that I got in contact with the Brigden family, and sadly, he died just before I managed to get in correspondence with him. But his family were very kind and sent details to me of what he'd been up to and other things. So I managed to get together a huge collection of source material. So the key bit then, I think, really is the Payne family. I don't think they necessarily have huge amounts of money. They may have chipped in with the setting up the school. Dougie's family is in a decent sized house in Hove, Langdale Gardens, because GB Payne, his father, is the cartoonist of the Daily Mirror, and his uncle is also another famous cartoonist who produced the Brown Family Christmas cartoon about World War One, which is a very, very famous World War One cartoon. So the family were fairly okay off, but it's more the gesture of help that the Paynes give James that gets the school set up. Josephine Payne makes the offer, and this is true, of housing the O'Byrnes over the summer when they leave Holland House and come to the Claremont, and when Dougie and James are setting up the school. So obviously it must have been a fun summer all in 57 Langdale Gardens. And one of the things of the book is, of course, is how they get the house that they use as their first school. And I think the Paynes may have helped, or the O'Byrnes, but from what I can gather from the letters, it is mainly James that persuades Willits, the estate agents, to lease them this, what would have been a 45-year-old house by this time, still very grand, still in very good nick, in a very exclusive avenue in Hove. So he must have had a bit of a silver tongue. He must have been able to persuade people. I'd like to have seen how he would have done on Junior Apprentice. That would have been an interesting show if they'd had it back in the 20s. But this is the house they managed to lease, and it's called the Claremont School simply because it's Claremont House. And the site is a good one. The money's raised from Ross, it seems, and this is going to be their very first location, which is big enough for a school of 10 boys at the start. They would obviously need more children than that, and they do get more. The numbers do go up, but this is the key bit. So a lot of the story is getting the school off the ground. The summer of 1925, where Dougie and James get the books and the uniforms and overcome the hurdles. But they've also got a very vengeful Clovis Chubb, as you'll see in the book. And Chubb gets his own back, but he doesn't always get his own way. And I think very much that the Claremont, wins with Holland House closing down. So there must have been a bit of rivalry between the two. And if Clovis Chubb is the character I make him out to be, he would have been very bitter and very angry at this young 11-year-old boy with only 1 year left to go at the school, taking a number of his boys away and some of his members of staff as well. But this is what James does. He's not in this picture here, but again, you can see the numbers by the time James has left have picked up. And so you've got more boys, you've got the uniform still. This is still in Second Avenue. You've got Bill now here playing a bigger role. You've got Mick looking very desolate and very, very, very weary, looking at the camera. And of course, Ross looking the wrong way again, bless him. And no Eileen in this picture. And if we move on, you can see the school by 1928 has grown. Mob has an argument with the rest of the family and leaves, doesn't get back in touch after 28. Jeremy, his grandson, never has anything to do with him. The family never hear of him again. He dies in Hemel Hempstead in 1951. So he must have had a supernatural liver. This isn't James, although it looks a bit like him because he's always very smiley in the photos. But here you have Eileen, Mob, Ross looking the wrong way again, and Bill. And by this time, you can see the school's doing well. So they do manage to get it off the ground, this big will they, won't they question in the book. You can see it's quite an international school. It's got boys from different countries. By this time, Clifton has gone off to study at Herne Bay for his scholarship at the school there, at senior school. But the school thrives, and I think a lot of that is down to the O'Byrnes. It's down to the selling that Dougie and James do, but it's also the location. Hove is a fantastic place for schools at this time. There's 30 odd schools in the 1871 census, and at one point Hove in let's see if I can find it now, 1871, 10% of the town's population are employed working in private schools like the Claremont. And the reason is Hove is a healthy place. It gets 1,635.82 hours of sunshine in 1927. It only had 37 inches of rain that year, had a maximum temperature of 57 degrees Fahrenheit, and so its population of 58,000 people had a healthy diet of tennis, bowling, swimming, sailing, and Hove Lagoon is used for model boating and sailing at this time. The sea is a big draw, of course, because it's used for swimming by all the schools. Of course, not mixed bathing, as you get here, but you've got a real range of things. Hove has, and this is completely unlike today, we've lost a lot of these. Hove has 29 lawn tennis courts, one meadow turf bowling green, 24 hand tennis courts, five Cumberland turf bowling greens, four croquet lawns, and a partridge in a pear tree. No, 10 cricket and 10 football pitches, one of which, of course, is the Goldstone ground where Brighton Hove Albion were. There was a Lido cinema by Hove Station. And if you want to know about the very, very first school, it's back in 1796, and it was Dr. Morell's Academy at the Wick. As I mentioned, in 1871, there were 31 schools. And this is why you get people like Isambard Kingdom Brunel, Eric Gill, Rab Butler, Winston Churchill being schooled here. And they come because it's a healthy place. You've got the Downs. Hove isn't as built up at this time. You've got swimming, fresh air, good weather compared with the rest of the country, and the proximity to London. The schools even advertised to Birmingham, Leeds, Liverpool because of the train network. It really was pitching, far away from Sussex, but it worked. The numbers go up, and so Hove in 1925 is past its peak for schools, but it does get this exciting new one, and it gets one with a Hollywood star as its swimming teacher. How good is that? The other reason why Hove is healthy, of course, is the spring. This is St Anne's Well Gardens in Hove, and of course the Chailey Beat Spring, which is still marked here by this sort of mock well. It's no longer in use, of course, was a way of getting spring waters for visiting children, and a lot of whom were very sickly when they got here. Winston Churchill, one of them, I'm going to have a drink of water as well at this time. He came as a very sickly little boy from Eton, and it was only because he had lots of fresh air and walks on the downs, which he loved, and horse riding and swimming, that he became a much healthier boy. And of course, his doctor was here. Dr. Moreau was here for the 5 days and nights that Churchill was very seriously ill when he came here. So perhaps Brighton and Hove saved Sir Winston Churchill, and the nation therefore should be in debt to us forever. But Hove also had a glamorous range of architecture. It had lovely buildings to put your schools in. This building here, this was the Prince's Hotel, which famously advertised no German or Austrian employees in World War I. And it was last King's House for Brighton Hove Council. It's now a private set of apartments and flats. But this was how Hove was all meant to look. This was part of a grand scheme to redevelop Hove as it moved west. It never happened, unfortunately. So we end up with, I'll come back to that picture in a minute. We end up with a range of different architectural styles, one of which is the estate built by Willits, the builders. And I'll mention that in a minute. But this meant that Hove had architecture, health, and the boys would simply play games amongst the town. You would run to different venues, you would run to the different parks, you would run up to the downs. So it was a good place for boys to be sporty. As you can see here, in 1933, the team had won 10 matches at footy and only lost one. This isn't the case in 1925. The earlier cohort and the very first cohort of the Claremont were appalling at sports. And so you have Mob, a talented cricketer, his son Wob, a talented cricketer, all pulling their hair out over the collective failure of their boys' sport. And so that led me to sort of make sport a big key theme of the book. And the finale, the big last scene of 1925-26, excuse me, is indeed a cricket match. And so we have cross country running up and down the streets like in Second Avenue here. Excuse me, talking too much, dry throat. This leads then to a story which I sort of ran with a little bit, pardon the pun, where the boys had no sense of direction, and two of them had to have a paper chase from the parents, a paper dropped for them to run the right way around Hove and not get lost. And so I developed this a little bit further and have them getting confused and picking up, finding confetti and ending up running into a church, which I'm not quite sure where that story came from. But the action does take place, of course, in Second Avenue. As you can see here, this beautiful set of buildings by Willits. And Willits buildings were known as being very strong, very durable, very desirable. And if you go to Hove today, If you look at the section of Hove that's built in yellow brick, that's Willett's estate. And part of Willett's estate was number 13, 2nd Avenue, which is Claremont House. The reason why it's called Claremont House is because Claremont in Esher at this time, in Surrey, is a very famous place to have been. Going back to the days of Queen Victoria, who took it from a place with a very unlucky reputation and made it a very fashionable place to be again. So you have lots of other Claremont houses taking the name, much like our one. So the book does spend time in 2nd Avenue, but it starts off here in Holland House with James's revelation, and it ends, as I mentioned, with a cricket match. And I don't want to spoil it for you, but obviously you've got this rivalry between Holland House and Claremont House, and schools used to play at the cricket ground. They also used to play, the Belmont School as well, used to play football at the ground here as well. It was originally used for football. And my favourite story in the early days of the cricket ground is it being invaded by sheep. And probably because it was, hadn't long before been a barley field. Not a cabbage patch, of course, like Twickenham, but it was a 9-acre barley field before it became a cricket ground. But you do have mob despairing at the school's ineptitude at cricket. And I found in the records this tale that Mob got very excited and bought all the boys. This is the first girl of the school here. He bought all the boys a set of cricket whites, like you see these lads wearing here, after being so delighted that they'd finally won a match. So in the story, I run with it a little bit, and I assumed that what would be the most important match they could win, who would be the team they'd most want to beat, as there'd been a rivalry between the two schools. Of course, it had to be Holland House. So because they're so inept, James has to come up with some ideas to help them beat this bigger, hairier, scarier team of ruffians from Holland House. And I won't tell you how he does it, but it does involve a dog. It does involve some incredible ingenuity, and it does involve something from the title of the story as well. It involves some beef, and I'll leave that up to your imagination in case I spoil it before you read the book. The story jumps between the 40s and the 1925-26. James has a series of flashbacks, and the reason why he has these is the story is about him being invited to the Claremont in its second location here, Wick Lodge, or St Michael's Hall as it was known, to give a talk about the early days of the school. He's invited back by Bill O'Byrne, who's the head by that time, and of course it's wartime by 1940. I played around with the dates a bit, but by this time James was in contact with Mick. He went to visit him twice in what presumably would be a bit of a retirement home in Hemel Hempstead. There was even a film. He filmed Mick, apparently, which I would love to see, but I think that was destroyed in World War II. And Mick, of course, dies in 1951, I believe. But the action then, this is the second location. So we have James coming to do a talk at the school as the war's taking off, and James is in uniform. He's, like Mick, he's now Lieutenant Clifton, and he does a talk to the boys about the early days of the school. And one of the boys says, "What's your favourite moment?" And he has a flashback to the cricket match. But you can see then as well that Bill, it's quite small writing here, but Bill is the by the 30s when this directory was published, he is very much the head of the school. Mick's moved on, and so again a very young man is at the helm. But as I promised, there's an air raid, and I'll let you read this. But as you can see, a school is bombed in World War II, and this is the time that James goes to do his talk. And so there's a bit of a cliffhanger. Is this how we finish the story? Are all these names a memorial to boys that die in a bombing raid in Hove in World War II? No, of course it's not, thankfully. Bill has the wisdom to have planned the evacuation of the school to Berkshire. And so when the German air raid dropped bombs on Wick Lodge, St Michael's Hall, the boys are well gone, thankfully, as it would have done a lot of damage and could have killed some, as we see. So these names are not a memorial. Thankfully, they are boys that moved on, starting with James Clifton to other schools. And here you can see some of the other names as well that follow on from him and where they go. So James goes into the Navy, as we find out. Through the war, the school makes its way to Berkshire and joins up with Bradfield College, a place called the Close. Tack onto another school here. This does age Bill. He's a young man. He's not a very well man from his early days, and he has the stresses and strains of keeping the school going with very little income, with parents that can't pay fees, and he sort of does everything he can to keep the school running through those stressful years. Because he's a poorly character, he doesn't go off to war. He's excused, and at the end of the war, he manages to raise the finance to buy a new location for the school. You can't go back to Wick Lodge because it's been bombed. The building is demolished, and I'll talk to you about that in a minute or two. And schools need a lot of space. I think they've learned that the Claremont can't operate with a tiny back garden. Hove is now, not in vogue anymore. The schools tend to move to more leafy locations, including state schools after the war. So you need somewhere with big grounds that's a bit grander. And this is the place that William chooses, that Bill chooses. Baldslow Place is the home of, as you'll see here, Langley Place School. And the headmaster is retiring. He wants another school to join with his and to carry on the traditions, but he doesn't mind if the school name goes, as long as some of the traditions are merged in with the incoming school, with a young head who can run it. And Will O'Byrne is that man. So the boys from the Claremont move here to Baldslow, and they're up against huge competition. There's lots of other schools, but Bill manages it with his dear wife Jean. They make the school grow again, and they see a number of the other schools disappear. If there's a race as such, if it's a competition, then Claremont is the winner. And today it's the only school in that region that still operates as a private school. And so, as you can see here, the school grows. You get loads more masters, loads more children. It becomes a big family school, still is today. And ladies are allowed into the school as well. It becomes co-ed. And here you can see the staff and perhaps the mothers in a sports day race as well. So it's a real success story for the Claremont. It grows and grows and grows to over 700 pupils today. It's got 3 sites in East Sussex. But all of this comes back to one maths book being thrown at an 11-year-old boy's head in Hove in 1925. So these children here today wouldn't be at school where they are without James Bernard Clifton and Mick throwing a book at his head. Amazing what happens in schools. But the story has one last gasp. We leave behind 1926, and we leave behind 1940, and we jump forward to the Hotel Metropole in 1987, which is where a meeting takes place between James Bernard Clifton and Maurice Brigden. And the reason why it takes place at the hotel is because the boys have been brought back together by this building once more. And by 1987, the Claremont is a newly reopened luxury hotel, and it's been featured in magazines all around the world, including House Beautiful magazine in Australia and the New York Times, where both James and Maurice read about it. And at the same time, they haven't been in touch for years since they were at school. Both fellas write to the building, to the hotel, and say, are you aware you used to be a school? And are you aware we used to come to you? And by the way, James set up the school there at the age of 11. And without them doing that, I wouldn't have the letters that wrote me into this fantastic story and set me off researching the tale of the Claremont School to write this book. And the hotel put the two men in touch very kindly after all those years, and that led to them having a reunion in 1987 at the Metropole Hotel. And the book finishes with this, and it has them sort of wandering off a bit Casablanca-esque into the sunset. Um, and where are they going to visit? Yeah, you can probably guess. But there's certainly no beef on the menu. And if you do get a chance after lockdown to have a tour of the guest house, please do. It always has art exhibitions up. It always is very friendly and welcoming. It does a mean cream tea. They serve food and they've got a bar. What more do you need? Crikey. But as you go around, you can imagine still the school being, the success it was in the place. Just to give you a bit of a guided tour, this is where the assemblies took place. This was a classroom. This was the dining room, and then the garden you'd enter via the steps at the back here. Up on the first floor were more classrooms. This was just the O'Byrne's dining room here to the left. If I go back to the house, so this is the ground floor that we were on a minute ago. This is the basement. Boys would enter through here. They'd bring their bikes down, hang their pegs up, their coats on their pegs, and then they'd come up for lessons on these two floors. And the top floor was the O'Byrne's private residence. So um, this is where it all happened. I did try and build in some of the stories from the archive into the book. So, for example, there's a burn mark on the marble surface above the radiator here, and I made that linked into the event where Mob lost his marbles. He rang the bell early for lunch, and he was a bit befuddled of the senses. And I think, this is why he left. His PTSD, his shell shock, really comes back to haunt him. But he's an intriguing character, as is James. I'm very fond of Eileen. I believe it's her that overordered all the beef and insisted that James had beef every day. It seems from the records, which is why he became a vegetarian. And Ross, I really like. Herbert Marshall seems a real character, and spent a lot of time with him. But it's Bill I have, utmost admiration for. This man who put his whole adult life into running a school, and it sort of led to his early death very much, I believe, as well. But there's some mysteries. Why do the O'Byrnes end up in Brighton? And I've dug into their history. This is the 1911 census for them, and they're not in Brighton before the war. They're in Plumstead in Kent, as you can see here. Bill is only 3 at the time. Mick is 29, so he would have been 32. Would have been sort of fairly senior by the time the war takes place. I think it's because they've moved over from Ireland, as a lot of people did at this time, including my father in the 60s, in the 1960s. I'm not that old. But I think because of his wound to his knee, he would have been invalided back to Brighton as a hospital town. And so after his injury at Ypres, I think that's where he would have ended up, and that's where the family decided to stay. And by the time you get to their accommodation in Brighton, they're living in Preston Park Avenue. So they must be doing fairly well from the teaching profession. But I am very proud I'm very pleased rather that the Claremont School today still honour the O'Byrne family, the 3 generations that ran the school. Unfortunately, Jeremy, who I had the honour to meet a couple of Christmases ago, he didn't get to run the school for very long. It was although he was a very young man, like his father and like James, it was deemed that because his mother had died, he didn't have enough of a say in to run the school, and so him and his sister very sadly had to move out of their home, which you can understand he's very upset about still today. But the O'Byrne family are remembered in this chapel, which was built to remember Bill, and Jean has a memorial as well, his wife. And I'm very pleased as well that the school has an O'Byrne lecture theatre. So that was mystery number 1. Mystery number 2, I have still not solved. This is who is A. Ross? Now, I've dug into famous golfers of the time, and I just keep finding the brothers Donald J. Ross and Alec Ross, who look very similar to Ross in our pictures, and the time tallies up. But the Donald J. Ross Society in America, because he's a very famous golf course designer, have said it. They don't think it's the same man. There is an Alec Ross who ends up as a Scottish alcoholic, brother of a Donald Ross back in Scotland, but that doesn't seem to be our AA Ross with the money to invest in a school and the the whereabouts to the with it all to teach boys. So if anyone can ever help me, he doesn't appear at any Brighton golf courses or Hove golf courses at this time, as you would have thought he would have done. So Alec Ross is very much a mystery I've got to track down. I struggled to work out where the Claremont moved to because it took me a while to work out St Michael's Hall and Wick Lodge were the same place, and where it says it was in Lansdowne Road isn't the case. The buildings are older, but I do believe it's what's now Wick Hall at the top of Lansdowne Road, a big 1930s, 1940s Art Deco building development, which would make sense with the building not being habitable after the bombing raid of World War II, because the school certainly couldn't move back. So it makes sense that it would be demolished. But that's something I've got to look into a wee bit more. And the other mystery was, why did Clifton go off to Herne Bay when he hit 12, when he got to senior school? And I think his clue is the Royal Navy. He went to Holland House because it trained young men up for the Royal Navy. He wanted a career in engineering in the Royal Navy, I think because Mick had been an engineer. I think Mick inspired him. Perhaps that's why he brought him to Claremont. The other reason why I think he ends up in Herne Bay, apart from the nautical side of life in Kent, is that it's where Douglas Payne's dad has another home. So I think the Payne family had a holiday home there, and so he had a very happy life, I hope. Another mystery I couldn't work out until recently, when Jeremy Oburn put me straight, was how Bill, if finances had been so bad during the war, how he raised money to buy Bordesloe Place in 1945. And the answer is Sir Egbert Cadbury of the Cadbury Empire. So chocolate wealth helped Bill O'Byrne buy this new place. And of course, the O'Byrnes had bought out Ross pretty early on, so it was their family business. And last mystery for you, why is the book called Beef Every Day but no Latin? Well, Clifton really does get put off beef, as you can see from an early age. And I'm just going to read this bit to you. I'll move on to, let's have a really disgusting bit of beef. Here we go. This will turn your stomach while I read this. And this is when they're up at the golf course waiting for Ross. And this is where him and Dougie decide on the sort of the ethos of the school. And this is where the book's name comes from. This is James talking. I quite like cauliflower, as long as it's in cheese. It's beef I can't stand. I winced and squinted as I thought of the rancid beef we were served at school. The great globules of saggy fat that seemed to permeate every mouthful. The gristle and jelly it seemed to include. The undercooked bloody servings. The overcooked tough ends of the malodorous chunks we seemed to get, which took your teeth minutes to break down. Worst of all were the little tubes, though. I'm sure you know what I mean. Whether in a roast or bully beef, it's those tough little white tubes that were once part of the poor beast's internal workings, its veins or valves or whatever they are. I'm sure I should be more technical, but I really don't want to investigate or look into it closer, nor do I want to dedicate any more thought. I just know that I've never once enjoyed a plate of any part of a cow, nor will I ever. I could quite happily do without it or any meat stuff for the rest of my life. What about lessons? I asked Dougie. We have the chance to decide what young minds need. What do you reckon? Well, said Dougie, I can't see any families signing up the product to their loins unless we offer the basics. The 3 R's, reading, writing and arithmetic, and then the classics and the arts, history, joggers, that sort of thing. I nodded in agreement. But no Latin, said Douglas. I find it really easy, but I've had any desire to learn that sucked from my soul at Holland House. For a dead language, it didn't half go on and on. I saluted my friend. I was more than happy with that decision. What else, he asked. Well, when it comes to churchified matters, you're as much of an unbeliever as I am, I added. So let's play down the whole God thing too. The amount of time children waste on all that gut rot is a crime. Shan't hear me moaning on that front, Dougie mused. I think Mob said something churchified once, but he's not one of the Bible-addicted type, so I think we're safe on that front. We raised our glasses and toasted once more. This school founder role was becoming one that evidently needed toasting quite a lot. What are you two toasting? Ross appeared behind us, surprising us both. He had evidently got rid of the client that he'd been dealing with speedily. Well, said Dougie, we've been toasting beef every day, cauliflower, lots of religion, and the endless study of Latin. And of course, they do end up with no Latin. Dougie and James get their own way, but they are overruled by Eileen on beef. No wonder he turns into a vegetarian. And if that hasn't put you off beef for life, look a little bit closer on this picture. This was when I was at the Metropole for a roast dinner, and it led to us starting up a new website, which my children find very funny, called Faces in Food, where if you look very closely in this bit of meat and other bits of meat, you can see what looks slightly like Noel Edmonds, I think. So the message of the story, the moral of the story, is always look very closely at hotels, I've learned, and food, and don't take things at first glance. And that's definitely what I've learnt from writing beef every day, but no Latin. If I haven't put your food enough, then you may like to know that there is my next book is a factual one out in May next year. You can pre-order it from Waterstones, but obviously I'd rather you got it from our local bookshop here in Steyning, run by Sarah, of course, and her wonderful team and family. But as you can see already, there are orders being placed for my book about Sussex's food and drink history, which I'm very excited about. And talking of books, if you are putting in an order at the bookshop with Sarah during lockdown, if you are looking for Christmas presents, then I'd be delighted if you want to purchase any of mine to do my Del Boy bit for the moment here and flog you my wares. If you want to read more about the Claremont, the back of the book has a historical notes section. It tells you what's true and what I've had to make up to fill in the gaps. Beef. The Claremont also is mentioned in Visitors Historic Britain, East Sussex and Brighton and Hove, and it's also in Historic England, Brighton and Hove as well. And I think it's briefly in my last book, A to Z of Brighton and Hove as well. But I would ask, of course, that just to remind you that you can buy any book from Steyning Bookshop. Sarah can order anything for you. And of course, with Christmas coming and with the awful year that there's been for bookshops this year, please support your local bookshop. Sarah, as you know, will post or deliver books to you. So as you go, here we go, we're going in the door now. Here we go. As you go to Steyning Bookshop, please try and support them when they open again. And while they are online only, obviously, please, if you are going to buy beef, make it your first port of call. This is my other book as well, which has just come out before beef. But if you do have any questions on beef or any of my books, please email me at this address here, which I'll leave up on the screen for a few more seconds. And if you are interested in books by my fellow authors at the Real Press, we are very lucky here in Steyning to have our own publishers, our independent publishers, which is the Real Press, run by the very talented, very prolific David Boyle, who we are honoured to have in Steyning. And he very kindly took on beef, so a big thank you to him. While I'm doing my thank yous, I must thank Tom Aubrey for signing me up at the last moment. Thank you to David Cuby as well for all the help this week. I think I've driven him mad with IT requests. And so thank you, David, for your help as well. If you'd like to order any Real Press books, of course, there's more information about them here, and they're on sale in Steyning Bookshop as well. Okay, that's sort of me more or less done. As I mentioned, Pond Puddings and Sussex Smokies is coming out next year. If you've been interested in food today, or if you watched Bake Off last week, you'll learn more about it with my next book. And these are my forthcoming ones, including my first national book in 2022 that I've written solo. We have a whole list of them I can send you if you email me or if you go on the website. And of course, there are more Zoom talks available. There are tours, and there's even a walking tour of beef that we can do around Hove once COVID allows. Um, or we do socially distanced depending on the rules. So please email me or go on the website if you want more details about talks, tours, events, and anything else that we offer. I will at this point then just say a very big thank you very much to you all if you've managed to stick here for the whole hour or so. I hope to answer your questions on email, and I hope to see you in April when I'm doing a talk on Hilaire Belloc for the Society, hopefully in person, but if not, we'll be online again. Thank you very much for your time. And just to remind you, this replaced the talk that was going to happen as the gentleman or the lady doing it as was poorly. So apologies there. Thank you very much for your time. And I would say safe journey home, but you are, of course, already home. So I hope you've had a good few raids to the fridge, and I'm going to work out how to stop the Zoom meeting very soon. Here we go. Right. And so if you haven't gone already now, goodbye to you all. Thank you very much for joining me, and hope you enjoy reading beef if you haven't already. Goodbye. Thank you.